So the streets are talking, Victor.
Hey,
Get him, daddy.
don't you walk on me.
Let's call Dr. Aaron Adams from the Bonefish Tarpon Trust. What are you up to these days? Like, what's the most current thing you're working on?
Most current thing we're working on, we're getting up some projects geared up in Belize and Mexico. So kind of getting with all the startup stuff for that. And then in Florida, working a bit on the spinning fish issue in the Keys, continuing to try to do a lot of policy stuff with all the water infrastructure mess. So yeah, and there's no boring day, that's for sure.
So in terms of those trips that you go on, how much of the behind the scenes stuff are you producing for that? Like, are you finding the guides to go with? Like, how does that all work? Like when you go to a certain spot like Belize to do a research study?
Oh yeah, no, we've got long-term relationships with a large number of guides and anglers wherever we work. And so, yeah, all that stuff is set up, and we're trying to work on matching calendars and that kind of stuff today for work in Belize and Mexico. So yeah, we work, within those communities all the time. So it's just a matter of making sure everything is synced up. Yeah.
So how long are those trips usually? How long are you down there for?
It depends. I guess a week is most typical, sometimes shorter, sometimes a couple weeks. It all depends on what we're doing and, how far. So if it's down there, if it's like Mexico and Belize, then it's usually a couple weeks. If it's just Belize or just Mexico, a week or 5 days. It depends on how much we have to do. And weather is a big factor as well. So, like if there's a tropical storm or hurricane come in, we might bug out early, depending. So, yeah, there's you got to be flexible. That's for sure.
Yeah. So
it's like fish, to some extent, the weather dictates a lot.
Yep.
Hey, everybody, listen up. We're launching something big for all of our Brooklyn Fishing Club members. It's the BFC Members Only Zoom series, and we're bringing back some of our most legendary guests from the podcast. Crazy Alberto Nee, Paul Dixon, Bouncer Smith, just to name a few. These are live, exclusive Zoom calls where you can ask questions, hear stories that didn't make the show, and connect with these legends in a private, members-only setting. Want in? Go to brooklynfishingclub.com and join the club today. You can also check out the full lineup of upcoming Zooms on our events page. It's free for members, but spots are limited. Don't miss it.
So let's bring it back a little bit. I want to hear a bit about your story. So it seems like you've been fishing since you were a kid, right? I mean, where did this all start for you?
Yeah, 4 or 5 years old. I started fishing, got some old pictures of me with the fishing rod when I think I was 4. So that got the whole fishing bug going. But relatively quickly, I started asking some of the why questions. Like if I would go fish for bluegill in a tidal creek one day and it was great, and went back, a week later and it was dry. Yeah, so trying to figure out tides. So pretty quickly became a scientific interest as well as just the fishing. So by the time I was in probably junior high, I had a pretty strong focus in that kind of science, biology.
That's really cool. So you grew up around the Chesapeake Bay area, right?
Yeah, kind of northeast of Baltimore. I'm spending a lot of time in the various reservoirs and streams and then tidal portions of the bay as well. So as I was growing up in the 70s, the bay was collapsing. The striped bass, or they call it their rockfish, the population was crashing. A lot of problems with oysters, crabs started crashing, a lot of seagrass die off. And that was, just really, pretty devastating for people like myself and others even more so who depended on that resource. So that was pretty influential for me as far as what career path I would take. So I'm definitely interested in the science, but I'm most interested in science that addresses those kind of problems. Figuring out what's causing those types of population crashes and then working to fix them. So yeah, that's kind of so the fishing kind of is kind of the passion, and then the science is a lot of the motivation, and then my experience with seeing ecological or environmental decline like that has been really influential as far as having the persistence to keep doing this type of work, because it sure as hell isn't very glorious or glamorous.
When you say that, what do you mean? What are some of the most unglamorous aspects of it that people normally wouldn't think of?
Well, one of the unique things that we do at Bonefish Tarpon Trust is we don't just do the field research, which is often pretty interesting and fun. We take the information that we learn and put a lot of effort into improving regulations, changing how management is done, that type of stuff. And so that's not very fun. That's all policy, politics kind of stuff, meetings. Yeah, I mean, every once in a while I have to wear like a coat and tie, which is pretty terrible. So yeah, it's that aspect, trying to work with that political machine
Yeah.
is not, for me. Some people like policy, that whole process of policy and politics, but it doesn't really appeal to me. On the other side, people might be, Discovery Channel, National Geographic. He's about some scientist doing research, that type of thing. And it's always, or almost always, pretty straightforward. But, when you're doing a lot of that type of field work, stuff breaks, boats break, gear break, weather suck. Sometimes depending on what we're doing, we're tracking fish for 17, 18 hours at a time, nonstop. That kind of stuff can get pretty intense. So sometimes after research trips, we have to kind of just chill for a few days, depending on what's. And then there's as part of translating all that research into policy, there's a lot of desk and computer times. And I mean, for a lot of people, that's the normal. But for the type of work that we do, it's kind of a necessity. Yeah, most of us would rather be on the water all the time, but
Definitely.
but making sure that all the information goes into improving regulation requires a good bit of that desk time and policy time.
Yeah. So I know that you've explored a lot of tropical, like foreign areas for these fish, but have you ever had any experience working with like urban fisheries in like a city setting, like for example, like Baltimore or somewhere like that?
Well, geez, way back when, one of my first jobs out of college was actually sampling the inflow pipes at a power plant on the bay.
Wow.
That was crazy. So that's kind of one end of the spectrum. We work in Biscayne Bay, the Miami area, a decent amount. Some in Tampa, those types of places, which are, I mean, they're urban, but they're not like, say, working in Boston Harbor or New York City kind of things. So as far as our overall work, no, for the most part, it's not in urban settings.
No, I just figured I'd ask if you had experience on the way up. That sounds crazy though, that one job that you had. What was that like? How long did you do that one for?
I lasted probably about 8 months in that one.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, sampling the inflow of power plants power plants are dirty places. Yeah, so that was okay. And then I actually moved from there. I moved to Southern California and lived out there, Southern California, then Central California for about 4 years or so. I worked for California Fish and Game. Yeah, I sampled some of their commercial catch of what they out there call rockfish. Yeah, it's kind of like our sea bass here. So yeah, I did a lot of that kind of stuff. Santa Cruz, Monterey, that area. So yeah, that was a great experience. And then from there, came back to the East Coast, went to Virginia Institute of Marine Science for a master's degree. All my work there was offshore artificial reefs.
Cool. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that was great. We were doing scuba diving and doing fish counts and then estimating lengths of fish, try and get a handle on what was going on those artificial reefs so we can help management kind of figure out fishing regulations. And it was interesting because if we would go out and do a fish count, let's say on a Thursday, and then a head boat went to that reef on the Saturday, we went back on Monday, pretty much all the bigger fish were gone. Yeah. Head boats,
Wow.
I mean, it's been a while, but I imagine it's the same. They'd go to a spot, they'd fish for a certain amount of time. And once they'd get a bunch of fish, and once the size dropped to a certain length, they'd move on to the next artificial reef. Yeah, so that was pretty impactful to me as far as seeing pretty much directly how even recreational fishing can pretty quickly influence the fish populations on reefs like that.
Wow, you saw it firsthand. It's wild.
Yeah, and I crewed on a couple head boats, so I got to see it from that side as well. So that's how I have a pretty good idea of what that fishing pattern is. Yeah, I mean, if people aren't catching fish, they're not going to stay on that spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they'll keep moving and then, taking out the bigger fish and then keep moving on. And you get to a certain point where there aren't that many bigger fish anymore. But
What were some of the biggest fish you saw down there on those dives?
the black sea bass got pretty big. And
I think like double digit sea bass.
on occasion, yeah,
Wow.
we get really big tautog, especially in winter. It was wild. So it was most of our work was done in the region, say from Chesapeake Bay south to the North Carolina border. And so we get in the winter, we would see a really big Maine lobster. They'd migrate down from up north, I guess. And that's when we get a lot of the tautog. And then in the summer, geez, we get everything from amberjack to spadefish to mackerel to gag grouper.
Wow.
Yeah, so there was pretty decent seasonality to it, which was really interesting. Yeah, and it's interesting because way back when, many decades ago, there used to be really large mussel beds on the bottom in that mid-Atlantic Bight area.
Uh-huh.
But trawling pretty much wiped those out. And that provided a lot of the hard bottom type habitat for all those species. But now it's the artificial reefs, and it's just otherwise it's open sand bottom. And so they're kind of, little oases. So they attract pretty much everything, which is cool on the one hand. On the other hand, like I already said, it makes them pretty susceptible to being overfished.
It's wild.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of them are overfished. We have the Rockaway Reef out there in front of Queens, and I know that thing has been picked apart.
Yeah.
Especially by a certain time in the season. It's just like, I don't know. It's tough.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, artificial reefs, they can be good management tools if they're used appropriately. But generally, what they're used as is kind of fish attracting devices where they publish the numbers, right? So it enhances fishing opportunities rather than increases the fish population. Programs, they'll put out artificial reefs and not publicize it. They're creating habitat, but they're not putting a big bullseye on it. And so, yeah. And, it's like the old days, captains used to have logbooks of latitude, longitude of hard bottom that they'd found or wrecks or stuff like that. And they'd protect that, with their lives. But it took time and effort to find those places. And since they were protected, they didn't tend to get overfished. But when they're advertised like that, yeah, they tend to be problematic in my view. But yeah.
You know what I'm surprised hasn't been done more in the Northeast? People building fish attractant devices or fads or whatever they're called. Because I've been to Guatemala and those guys have created with like buckets and concrete and chains. They've created some insane ecosystems off the coast where they can just go and net tuna, like little bonito for live bait for the marlin. Like,
yep.
Everything is swirling around these fads that they've created over like 2 decades.
Yeah.
They're really cool. I caught some big grouper on those.
Yeah. No, it's amazing.
Nobody's really done it in the Northeast. Like nobody's tried to build their own. I feel like maybe a few people haven't. Obviously, wouldn't have heard about it. Nobody's going to talk about that. But
who are doing it aren't telling anybody that they're doing it.
I hope somebody's doing it. I really do. I hope somebody out there is making their own artificial reef with some concrete. I hope I'm giving somebody the idea to do it.
Yeah. I mean, they're doing it through the state and all that kind of stuff. The regulations are pretty strict, but I'd be amazed if people are not doing their own things, making their own numbers.
Their own numbers. Making the numbers.
Yeah.
Some people are definitely doing that. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the bonefish and tarpon. They're often associated with the pristine flats that they hunt on and live on. And, I would love to know what are the top 3 ways that human activities have impacted them.
Wow. Oh, sounds like a simple question, but it's actually pretty complicated. So let's see. I guess we can start with bonefish. Depending on where they are, where we're talking about, in some places there's pretty significant net fishery for bonefish. in Cuba, north coast of Cuba,
Okay.
they'll harvest many tons of bonefish a year. In a couple locations that some colleagues have investigated, and it's all legal. It's part of their commercial fishery.
How many tons?
I want to say 20.
Oh my God, a year?
Yeah, uh,
That's
and that's
wild.
one area on the north coast of Cuba. In other places, there's a decent amount of netting that goes on as well. Yeah, and they're used for food, so it's not like they're being wasted. But yeah, they're targeted. In Belize, there used to be some netting, but they stopped that decades ago. And their population, the bonefish population there has come back really well. In Mexico, places like Ixcalac, there's kind of local informal agreements about not netting because the recreational fishery is so important there.
Uh huh.
So, depending on where you are, that could be a big concern, is that netting. Closer to home, say in the Florida Keys, a big concern is water quality and habitat issues. So Florida has a big problem with wastewater flowing into coastal areas. So and that comes into the coastal areas two ways. One is effluent from sewage treatment plants, and they'll remove some of the nutrients that cause things like algae blooms, but not enough. So we still get a lot of algae blooms. But then the effluent also contains a lot of contaminants because the wastewater treatment plants aren't designed to remove contaminants.
Okay.
So we did a study recently, for example, in the Florida Keys on bonefish and the amount of pharmaceuticals in the bonefish. So if you take a drug, like let's say a heart medication, your body really only processes about 50% of that, and the rest you excrete out. So that goes into the wastewater system, whether it's a treatment plant or a septic tank, and then that is then passed into say groundwater, and then eventually into estuaries. So when we looked at pharmaceuticals in bonefish in the Florida Keys, every single bonefish that we sampled had pharmaceuticals in it.
That's
One
insane.
one bonefish, I think it had 17 different pharmaceuticals in it. Yeah. And so then we followed that up with a study of redfish from around the state, from Pensacola all the way down around the state to Jacksonville. And I think it was 97% of those fish had pharmaceuticals in them.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And the scary part is,
What?
yeah, that depending on which study, but around 50% of the fish had sufficient level of pharmaceuticals that for that fish considered
Considered what?
therapeutic, as if you were taking a medication to, fix a certain condition.
So the fish were all medicated
Yeah, pretty much.
and people were eating them.
Well, okay, we won't get to that. We'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
The pharmaceutical negatively affect fish behavior. Looks like for redfish, they negatively affect growth. So they're essentially the redfish are skinny for their length. You expect them to have more weight for their length, but they're kind of skinny. That can cause behavioral changes. So they might not be as effective at spawning, affect juvenile growth. They've also found that a lot of the pharmaceuticals make fish less cautious, which means that interactions with predators might be more common. They don't go well. There's a study on juvenile salmon and the pharmaceutical the juvenile salmon to migrate downstream early when they were smaller. Weren't as many other juveniles migrating, but their survival was low. So those were big concerns about the impacts of pharmaceuticals.
What pharmaceuticals are we talking about? Like, what were the most popular ones that were found in them?
You name it. There's a lot of heart medication drugs. Opioids are in there. Blood pressure medications. A bunch of psychoactive drugs, like for schizophrenia or other types of mental illnesses.
Yeah.
Yeah, it runs the gamut for sure. Yeah. In the Keys, trying to remember, I want to say that we detected 56 different pharmaceuticals.
Did you detect any cocaine in the fish?
They didn't test for it.
Maybe they should have. I don't know.
But they found a lot of opioids, and then they also found the pharmaceutical that's in Narcan, which is
So there was definitely cocaine in the water then too, for sure. One can only safely assume.
that I'm sure you can see with all the gummies people are eating these days.
Oh my God, these fish are fucked up.
So yeah, so it's yeah,
They're all messed up.
take in as 50% goes through. But as far as the levels in the fish, the levels, the concentrations, like if you were to eat a fillet, is so low you'd have to eat hundreds of fish to get a therapeutic effect. However, no one has done the research on chronic exposure. So let's say you're somebody who goes out, catches fish, and basically eats fish every day. Nobody knows what the effect of that type of long-term, low level exposure.
Yeah, nobody knows.
Nobody has studied it. I mean, the other thing that's kind of scary is pharmaceuticals are not regulated as part of like a water pollution type of regulation. So, if you were to go and dump a truckload of pharmaceuticals into a river, that's pretty much not regulated. So, effluent from different plants or even coming out of sewage treatment plants, pharmaceuticals don't really get measured. So a lot of this stuff that we're just starting to learn. But studies I've seen of reviews globally of sampling, they find pharmaceuticals pretty much everywhere. So
That is fucking crazy.
Yeah, up for striped bass.
It makes me not want to get sushi ever again, unless it's like fake crab or like avocados.
I mean, I eat a lot of fish.
Me too. I'm thinking about it now. I'm like, maybe that's the reason I'm so fucked up. I've been eating all this fish and now I'm insane. So it's all making sense. So
a lot on all of that stuff. But we do know studies on other fish that they've done, for example, in Sweden, that those behavioral changes that the pharmaceuticals cause definitely result lower survival, those types of things, which is a problem.
How much lower of a survival?
And I'd have to look up the papers, but it was notable.
It was drastic.
Not drastic, but it was notable.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh shit. Yeah. I think I should probably take a break from eating fish. Maybe. I don't know. This episode is bad for the business.
I mean, the effect on the fish is behavioral. One thing, it's the effect on people. Like I said, short-term exposure, no problem, but nobody's ever looked at the long-term, low chronic exposure. So,
and it would be a long study to have to undertake.
Yes.
Who's going to really do that? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Who's going to pay for that study? I don't think anybody cares enough to do that study at all.
Well, all the other chemicals that we're ingesting with our food supply, it'd be tough to tease it out.
So yeah, people were eating pharmaceutical fish. Pharmaceutical fish. So crazy. And they still are, sounds like.
Oh yeah. I mean, people eat fish all the time. But again, fish contain a lot of fish contain a lot of mercury. Because neurological symptoms. Not to eat fish more.
Oh my God.
So yeah, I mean that's unfortunately anything that you eat in the modern world is gonna have something in it. They find things like DDT and PCBs and polar bear fat in the Arctic.
That's wild. I believe it. So let's circle back to how the human activities impact their flats.
So, okay, that was bonefish. Those are a couple of the big concerns. Concern for permit. Juveniles need sandy beaches as habitats, so we get worried when there's some kind of development that alters the sandy beaches. We also get concerned when we have die-off seagrass, like in Florida Bay, that might affect permit ability to eat, those types of things. Might affect the amount of prey that's in those areas. If the seagrass beds start to have problems, that'll affect permit diet. That'll affect their behavior because they got to find places to have food. We're figuring out where permit gather to spawn in large groups, and we're doing some research on that. So we've been able to get, based on research we did in the lower Keys, a place called Western Dry Rock. When we tagged permit on the flats, around 70% of the permits in the flats went to Western Dry Rocks to spawn. So we were able to get, prior to that, we were able to get permit in the Florida Keys as no harvest during spawning season, which is during the summer. But then we found that even people catching release fishing at Western Dry Rock, with a lot of sharks, like 30% or more of the permit were getting eaten by sharks.
Wow.
So we worked with the fishing community in the state. And so now Western Dry Rocks is just you can't fish there during spawning season.
And that's because of you guys?
Yeah, us and collaborators. Yeah.
Wow.
Getting that done, for that specific spot because it was deemed to be so important for the Lower Keys permit fishery.
What are some other big victories you guys have had in terms of, holding on to land and preserving it?
Well, we don't get into that type of land trust thing, but so in the Bahamas, we were able to get, 5 new national parks designated in the Bahamas to protect bonefish locations. And we get one park, we're able to get an expanded protected bonefish spawning location. So that's a big one for sure. We're working towards that police. Bonefish didn't used to be the case, but it has been now for about 15 years. Bonefish are catch and release only in Florida, which is a big improvement.
When did that change?
That was around, I want to say, 2010.
Wow. So it's really not that long ago.
Right. So allowable, harvest is 1-2 fish over a certain lane.
Yeah.
That wasn't generally practiced, but if you were to go to some of the shoreline or bridge fishing locations, you'd find bonefish in buckets. Yeah, they're catch and release.
Do they even taste good? I mean,
yeah, they're not bad. Tons of bones, tons of tiny bones. Let's see, police, bonefish, catch and release only now. That's pretty, significant one as well. So yeah, along those lines, there's been a good number of victories. We've been able to get kind of going more to the policy side of things. We've been able to get the state of Florida to put some money into upgrading sewage treatment plants to address the nutrients issue and getting some money to perhaps start retrofitting the sewage treatment plants to remove pharmaceuticals. So research in Sweden and Switzerland has shown that if you expose the effluent in the sewage treatment plant to ozone, it gets rid of most of the pharmaceuticals. So that's been a big one as well. We've been able to work with others to get money flowing for Everglades restoration, which has been quite the challenge. Yeah, it's a long list for sure of progress that we've made.
So you've tagged quite a few fish, right?
Yeah, well over 100 permit were tagged for that specific study, and then other fish have been tagged in other studies as well.
And you were there for the 100 taggings?
I participated in some of them, but most of that research was done by colleagues.
Okay.
We worked with colleagues, different universities, that project. So they did the overwhelming amount of field work on that for sure. So the way Bonefish Trust works in that respect, the money we raise, it pays for our own scientists and other staff, of course, but we also use some of that money to give grants to other researchers, aren't BTT, who have a specialty, particular field or skill to expand how much we can do, versus just doing it ourselves. Yes, it allows us to be super effective given our relatively small size compared to a lot of other areas.
Has there been one migration pattern that you've figured out that really surprised you?
Yeah, so that moves us into tarpon. With tarpon, a couple of 100 tarpon were tagged with what are called acoustic tags. And they're about the size of depending on the tag, a double A or a single A, double A to a C-size battery, maybe a little bit smaller. And they have a small battery in them, and they put out a supersonic ping. Think about listening to a movie that's got a submarine in it. And that ping travels through the water, and we put out in the water at different strategic locations what are called receivers or detection devices. And so if a tarpon swims, within, let's say, 500 yards or so of one of those receivers, the receiver will detect that ping, and each ping is coded. And so we know which fish it is. And those tags for the ones we're using for tarpon, they'll last for 5 years.
Wow, 5 years? That's wild.
Yeah.
Where does the tag go in? In the dorsal fin?
No, we actually do a surgery and insert it into their abdomen.
Wow.
Yeah. So
what? How long does the surgery last? It's crazy.
Yeah, no, it's very quick. The quicker the better.
They all survive that, or is there a mortality rate to the surgeries?
The vast majority do. We track permit bonefish the same way with different size tag depending on the size of the fish
That are in their bodies.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
cool. That's so cool.
And so the tarpon, the tag reading for tarpon lasts about 5 years. And so we knew that tarpon traveled long distances, but we were able to figure out some pretty interesting patterns. So for example, we tagged a fish, Key West, and a couple months later, it was detected in Chesapeake Bay. So they regularly migrate, between South Florida and Virginia, for example, on the East Coast. And so what we found is that it looks like there's 3 like subpopulations or subgroups. So in the spring, early summer, when the fishery is at its peak in the Florida Keys,
So 3 groups that move at different times?
in different spatial patterns.
Okay.
So if you have the Florida Keys in the late spring and the early summer, they gather there in big numbers and then they'll go off in the shallows and they go offshore at full or new moons to spawn. So that is like a mixing zone. Portion of those fish that gather there to spawn will migrate up the East Coast, some as far as Virginia or some farther. I mean, every summer now, people are catching tarpon or 2 off the south coast of Cape Cod. And then another subgroup from the Florida Keys will migrate up the west coast of Florida, and they'll go as far as Louisiana, Mississippi Delta. And there, during the summer, those Florida fish will mix with fish that have migrated the subpopulation that is in Texas and Mexico. So those fish will migrate as far as Delta. There'll be some mixing there during feeding, but then they go back to Texas and Mexico. So you've got those kind of 3 subgroups. That's been really interesting to see.
Hey, everybody, listen up. We're launching something big for all of our Brooklyn Fishing Club members. It's the BFC Members Only Zoom series, and we're bringing back some of our most legendary guests from the podcast. Crazy Alberto Nee, Paul Dixon, Bouncer Smith, just to name a few. These are live, exclusive Zoom calls where you can ask questions, hear stories that didn't make the show, and connect with these legends in a private, members-only setting. Want in? Go to brooklynfishingclub.com and join the club today. You can also check out the full lineup of upcoming Zooms on our events page. It's free for members, but spots are limited. Don't miss it.
I used to live on the water. The water was in my backyard in Stewart, and it was the end of this canal, and it was loaded with juvenile tarpon. Loaded.
How big?
There were some that broke me off that were definitely up to like 40 pounds.
Okay. Yeah, those are subadult.
And then the ones I caught were anywhere from like 8 pounds to like the biggest one I got was like a 15 pounder.
Yeah. So the ones that use the mangrove swamps are typically 12 inches or less. And then they'll start moving around a bit more and finding places like you're talking about, creeks and canals and stuff like that. Yeah. But they need those real backwater habitats. So that's a big concern for them.
Yeah, I'd be drinking my coffee and I'd be seeing them rolling backyard. I had a little fish trap that I'd pull up and get live bait from and then just cast out with a bobber. And
nice.
a lot of them broke me off, jumped me. I would say for the 12 that I hooked, I caught like 3.
Uh-huh.
The other ones played me. One actually threw the hook and the leader wrapped around my face, like around like my eyes. They're really, really tough fish. People see them. I feel like people see them on Instagram and they think that it's like an easy fish to target.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not at all.
No. They can be smart, when they get older and have seen some lures or flies. So they can be tough to get them to eat. And then once you do hook them, they'll kick your ass.
What do you think of the one that Blacktip got? I forget where it was. It was in South America somewhere. You see that one? It was like 300 pounds.
Yeah, they were over on the Pacific coast of, if I'm thinking of the same photo, of Colombia.
Oh, yeah, Colombia. That's where they got it. Yeah.
Yeah, tarpon are not native to Colombia. They're a Caribbean fish, but they got into the Pacific through the Panama Canal.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and that's obviously been many decades. And so they've expanded their population in the Pacific. Yeah, so there's actually somewhat of a different local commercial fisheries for them, where you are. and they're developing a recreational fishery too. And Colombia seems to have the biggest population of them.
You think that one was the world record? I don't think they got the official world record for it, but
I get good question. I don't know. They get some really massive ones over off the coast of West Africa as well.
have you been over there and seen some of them over there?
I have not. I've only seen pictures. Little bit of a deterrent is I don't want to. I'm not interested in fishing and having to dodge bullets at the same time.
Not get kidnapped?
Yeah. I mean, it's improving a lot of those places, and I know that there are people who go there fishing regularly. No, I haven't made that journey yet.
Do you know Patrick Sabile?
I do not.
He's created a ton of lures. He's been on the show. He used to be a guide in Northwest Africa. And he talked about getting shot at by pirates that were coming at him on the boats. He was fishing on the beach, and he said the shells were exploding in the sand, and he was running.
No thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll just take it from them that there's some big tarpon there.
Yeah.
Do with that one. We'll stick to Belize. And
Yeah, there's plenty of tarpon around here and safe places.
let's talk about the ones up north. What's going on there? Have they always been there, or what do you think of those?
Well, so the ones that go as far as Virginia, there have been people quietly fishing for tarpon in coastal Virginia for many decades. I'm personally aware of talking to some people. So I'm personally aware of people fishing for tarpon on purpose, at least in the early 70s, sooner, maybe back into the 60s.
In Virginia.
Yeah. So they migrate up there in summer to feed on all the menhaden that are super abundant there.
Wow.
Yeah. In more recent years, due to climate change, we're getting more and more reports of people catching tarpon off the New Jersey coast. And then, as I said before, as far north as the south coast of Cape Cod. So that type of travel
It's wild.
might become more common.
What's the biggest one you've heard of getting caught up there?
Oh, good question. I'm trying to think. I've seen a couple pictures on social media.
You see that one that guy speared off like Seaside Heights in Jersey?
I did not.
Yeah, he blasted one with a spear gun. It was like 120 pounder probably.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
it was a few summers ago. I wish I had somebody on my show that could like look that up. Yeah.
Wow.
It's a real thing that happened.
Huh.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, I
Yes.
don't know.
Is a lot of states, like, and you can understand why, like New Jersey and others, don't have any regulations for tarpon.
So
And
you
so,
could just blast one. He probably had them scoped out. They were probably coming in on a certain tide, and he's like, "Holy shit!" I researched it. You know, I could legally blast one of these.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so that's one thing we're trying to do is get the states to just add tarpon as catch and release only. And a lot of states, it's like that. Florida's like that. You have to have, if you want to harvest a tarpon, you have to have a special tag, kill tag, and you're basically allowed to submit it for like a world record type of thing. Texas, you can harvest tarpon, but they have to be bigger than the current state record. And so, the state record is increased, then that's more and more tarpon that can't be harvested. But yeah, a lot of states are improving their tarpon regulations. So we're just trying to kind of make that more across the board. But yeah, this past summer, there were a number of sightings of a school of tarpon up in Maryland part of the Chesapeake Bay.
Uh-huh.
I'm not aware of that having happened before. But yeah, so things are changing with all the climate.
But nobody's catching them. They're just seeing them, or are people actually landing them and not talking about it?
I think it's some of the last. Yeah. Well, a good fisherman is not going to tell you the best stuff because they want to keep that to themselves.
They're not going to tell you where the fat is.
No.
It's not happening.
No.
It's not
Okay.
happening.
Telling people my fishing spots.
What's the biggest misconception anglers have about fish behavior and conservation?
Fish behavior and conservation. Well, I'll start with the biggest conception that fishermen have is that they don't have any.
They don't have any input? Is that what you said?
Yeah, they don't feel like they have input or influence.
Yeah, because even when you go to these hearings where the state is supposed to hear these captains out, like they don't listen. There's no
Right.
point in even going to the hearings, and that's how they get you to not go.
Right.
Like,
Some of the non-glamour stuff I mentioned before is you have to keep going and you have to get organized and you have to, like, with Bonefish Tarpon Trust, we'll go to all the different state fishery meetings. And over the years, we've developed a good, strong reputation of when we show up with an opinion on a matter, we have science to back it up. So or the experience to back it up. If it's like a fisherman might have logbooks or that type of thing. So we've been able to
yeah.
have it that way, but it takes persistence. Yeah, it's not fun, but you have to keep going. It's great if you can get organized. And so, the recreational fisheries are worth a ton of money. So, for example, in the Florida Keys, we did a study 10 years now or more. There's the flats fishery, Florida Keys, has an annual economic impact of like $460 million. Yeah. And if you look statewide in Florida, the saltwater recreational fishery annually is worth $11 billion.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So when you can get those kind of numbers, that help, give you some leverage. That's a big help. But the biggest is that fishermen need to get organized in a cohesive way, pick the priorities that they want to address, and start working hard on them, and keep showing up at the meeting, and
Just
not
don't stop showing up.
not just show up at the fishery meetings. You have to keep doing it, but also talk to the politicians, because if the politicians are convinced that it's important enough that people are going to vote against them in the next election because of this issue, then they'll put pressure on the fisheries departments as well.
Yeah, maybe I should talk to Eric Adams. I'm not kidding. I once had a meeting lined up with Eric Adams before he became mayor. And
Okay.
I blew it off to go fishing. He was interested in working with Brooklyn Fishing Club, and I just went fluke fishing. So maybe I'll reach out again. I don't know.
Yeah. Next time, take him fishing.
Yeah, I should take him fishing.
We do.
Build his image. Say, Eric, stay out of the club, bro.
Yeah,
Come on, man. We need you on the fishing boat. You can't be out all night.
we do that a decent amount. We'll take politicians out on the water, to show them stuff, trying to communicate to them, and have them meet with fishing clubs, that type of thing, so that they understand what the issues are.
Are you familiar with like the striped bass at all? Do you guys work with them at all, or is that a totally separate thing?
We have not. We do bonefish, tarpon, permit, snook. I do some stuff with redfish as far as research goes. I lived up in the Boston area for 4 years, working on a PhD at UMass Boston. So I fished Cape Cod a lot.
What part?
Mostly of the Chatham area, Brewster Flats, Barnstable Harbor. We'd sometimes go up,
Ever fish Nauset?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's a good spot.
Yeah, it's all sight fishing, all fly fishing. That was back mid to late 90s, mostly. Yeah, late 90s.
Before all the seals?
Yes. When I was there, the seals started to show up. And interesting, because the seals started to show up, and I was kind of wondering where the big sharks were. And then the first sharks to show up were blue sharks. And you'd find some seals with blue shark sized bite marks out of them. And it wasn't until after I was gone that the whites showed up. Yeah. And the other interesting thing about back in the late 90s is that's when the sight fishing on the flats was just getting popular. And the fishing magazines back then, they'd have something on that, fishery, like every issue. And so when I first started fishing that area, you wouldn't see many people out there doing it. But by the time I left after 4+ years, the number of anglers had increased dramatically. But even so, there were and still are spots that people just don't understand, what makes striped bass tick. And so they miss some really, really good spots. And I'm not going to tell you where those are either.
No, they're not. No, they're definitely not. How do you feel about climate change? Do you think it's real? Do you think it affects species like tarpon and bonefish, permit? What do you think?
Well, it doesn't really matter how I feel or think about it. The data are the data. And it's beyond clear that, yeah, climate change is real, causing massive changes to our environment, like more intense hurricanes and rainstorms and floods and all that kind of stuff. But as far as fish, we already talked about tarpon to regularly migrate up New Jersey, if not Massachusetts these days. They didn't used to do that. We're starting to get reports of bonefish actually up near you in Jupiter.
I've caught them in Jensen Beach off the surf.
Yeah, if you catch them, the small ones in the surf, they're a species than the one we find on the flats.
Okay.
But on sand flats, they're catching larger fish that are the ones that we find on the flats. So
I got a bonefish on fish bites.
yeah. Don't mix them with the pompano.
Yeah, I was going for pomps. Yep.
Yeah. So those, most of the year, those bonefish, that species is in deeper water. But during the cooler months for pompano season, they'll come up into those shallows. So like out of Stewart, the commercial pompano guys catch a ton of those other species of bonefish. Another example of climate change effects, there's two more I can think of right off the top of my head, is black sea bass. They used to be, if you go back, say 30 years, the farthest north you would find them would be like probably southern New Jersey. Nowadays, there's enough black sea bass that there's a major fishery for them off, Cape Cod off Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Another example is striped bass. They're shifting farther north in many ways. And so that they're so far north that they're actually eating a lot of juvenile Atlantic salmon out of some of those rivers way up, like the Miramichi, that type of thing. So yeah, climate change is a big deal. And then you go farther south, like in the Florida Keys 2 summers ago now, there's like a marine heat wave. And that had temperatures in some places in the Florida Keys over 100 degrees, the water temperatures. And that never used to happen. So yeah, it's real. The data are extremely clear, and it's having a lot of impacts. And if you were to talk to people in the freshwater trout world out west, they're seeing all kinds of negative impacts.
Like what?
Well, for the water's getting too warm. And so not last year, but 2 summers ago, it was so warm that they pretty much shut down a bunch of the fisheries because the water was too warm. If you'd caught a trout, probably would have died from heat stress. More people won't fish during the day. They'll only fish during the morning when the water's the coolest. So yeah, a lot of impacts.
Oh man, kind of sounds dismal. Doesn't sound like there's like, how does it get better? What's the solution?
In my mind, that's the cool thing is we know what the problems are. And so we also know the solutions. So it's all about enough people getting concerned and force those solutions to happen. So I think about it, like say cancer. If you were a cancer doctor 40 years ago, 30 years ago, somebody came into your office, there was like very little you could do to help that person. But because they've done so much cancer research, those cancer doctors now have a lot of options because they can look at what type of cancer it is. They can figure out the treatment. So with all the science that we've done, BTT and other scientists, we know the causes of the disease and we know the treatments or the solutions. So now it's at the point of getting the doctors, who in this case are the politicians and policymakers, to use that information to cure the patient. So as fishermen, we're essentially the patient advocates, right? So if it's our relative who's in the hospital and we think the hospital is not doing a good job giving them treatment, then it's our job to advocate for them to get better treatment. We have to do for our fisheries. So fishermen have to call their political representatives. They got to send them letters. They got to let them know that these issues are important enough and that they're going to vote for somebody else next time, start to address them. And that's boring. It's not short term, so it's not immediately gratifying, but that's the way it works.
Oh man, do you think what do you think is the most difficult fish to get, like on the trophy level? The bonefish, the tarpon, or the permit? Or are they all
No,
the best in their own ways? Like, or there's got to be one that's like the most difficult target. Like I know bonefish, double-digit bonefish is like a big deal, right? Same with permit and tarpon. Obviously, get insanely big. I mean, what do you think?
yeah, they all have their challenges that make each species super difficult. That, catching a, say, 11, 12 pound bonefish is a big deal. You have to find them, then you have to get them to eat, and then you have to get them in without everything breaking. Or so, right? You have to find them. You have to be able to get them. You have to be able to cast to them, get them to eat for tough. And then once you have them on, as you've experienced, a lot of them spit the hook, break the line.
Tarpon, yeah.
Big, yeah, that's a major deal. But that said, I'd say permit is the toughest.
Really? Why?
Well, it's all like bonefish are the gateway drug because yeah, you have your best chance at catching one. So like if you go to a place like the Keys or the Bahamas or Belize and you spend a week there fishing, you're going to catch a bonefish. You have a lot of bonefish. Permit, you can spend a week fishing for them. In the worst case scenario, you don't see a lot. You don't have many shots. But even in a good scenario, for the most part, and there's exceptions, you see a permit, you get a good shot, and if you're fly fishing, for example, it's really tough. If you're throwing live crabs, it's a hell of a lot easier. If they're on the flats, though, and you're sight fishing for them with lures and flies, it can be super tough.
But if you see them on the flats and toss live crabs at them, you could probably get them. Sight fishing with crabs.
Yeah, you have a pretty decent chance. Yeah. So yeah, bonefish population in the Florida Keys declined big time in the late 90s through say 2012 or so, and we're not exactly sure why. And so yeah, that was a really major concern. It was really bad for a while, but starting in 2015,
why was that?
We think a lot of it was to do with when bonefish spawn, they go offshore. So you think of bonefish as a species that lives in the shallow flats, and it does most of the year. But to spawn, which usually happens between November and March or April, they'll migrate long distances to a pre-spawning location. And in the Bahamas, we've tracked them going 70 miles or more each way from their home spawning location.
That is wild.
They get together in that pre-spawning location, and then at dusk, they go offshore to spawn. We've tracked them going down to about 430 feet to spawn. So they're out in deep ocean water.
430 feet bonefish.
Yeah.
Spawn.
Yeah.
In the dark.
Yes.
Fish that live in the sun all year round, and then they go fucking 500 feet under. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I never knew that. That's so crazy.
And so when they spawn, they do broadcast spawning also, and their larvae can float around the open ocean between 40 and 70 days. And so it looks like a decent portion of the bonefish in the Florida Keys are probably spawned in Belize, Mexico, Southwest Cuba, and the ocean currents carry them up to the Keys. So we think that there was something going on maybe with a lot of netting, and like in South Cuba, for example, or the ocean currents changed for a handful of years, maybe the climate change. And so there weren't any new fish coming into the population for quite some time. So, but in more recent years, with some improvement, getting rid of netting, that kind of stuff, those types of things, we think that, the fish are kind of bouncing back. And then now that there are enough in the Florida Keys, we're finding local spawning groups as well. So they should start to be able to really recharge their population.
So there's a lot of hope for the future. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, Mother Nature is resilient. So if we can stop causing problems, there's a good chance of recovery. Striped bass compared to the 70s is a good example. Chesapeake Bay has taken them many decades, but the environmental health of the bay has improved a lot. So yeah, we can do it if we actually apply the information that we know to get it fixed.
So would you say that Florida has some of the best regulations in terms of all the places you've seen it? I mean, to me, it seems like they have all these different species regulated and different times of the year to get them, very specific times. I don't know. I feel like Florida has the best setup in terms of the regs. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, as far as fisheries regulations, yeah, I think Florida does a very good job. We're working with them to improve it even more, but yeah, overall, pretty good job.
What are you doing when you say you're working with them to help improve it? What are you guys up to?
Well, a lot of the work we're doing with them is to address the issues with habitat loss or degradation and the water quality issues, because those aren't part of fishery regulations. But if your environment is not healthy enough to support your fish population, it doesn't matter how well you regulate, when people can keep fish. There aren't going to be any fish if you don't have the habitats and water to support them. And that, in general, in most fisheries management, they talk about regulations and harvest, all that kind of stuff, and they don't manage the habitat as part of that process.
Interesting.
Yeah, so we're working in Florida and elsewhere too to try and address those habitat and water issues as part of that whole process.
Do you have any superstitions when you go on any of these trips? Do you believe in the bananas thing?
No.
Not at all.
I'll joke about it a lot and I'm giving people a hard time, but no. Sometimes I'll have a banana on a boat because I want to eat a banana. But when I crewed for a headboat out of Virginia Beach, as we run out of Rudy Inlet, the captain would hand the wheel to one of the crew, and he'd walk around, not say a word, just walk around the boat, opening everybody's coolers. And if he found bananas, he'd throw them overboard.
Yeah, we've had this guy on Bouncer Smith.
Yep.
Who literally made Fruit of the Loom take the banana out of the logo. Yeah, he had the CEO on his boat and he cut the guy's tags out of his clothing. And Fruit of the Loom actually changed the logo. There's no banana in it because of this guy. It's a true story. It's a true story. Bouncer Smith, 54 years as a charter captain in Miami.
Yeah. Yeah, he's pretty well known. He's got it dialed in there.
And he's a cool dude, man. And he's still fishing. He's still catching fish.
Yep.
He's still catching fish. So yeah. I don't know, man. So what's the next move?
Next move.
Where are you going next?
Next planned trip I have is to Belize to actually the purpose of the trip is to have some meetings with some of their resource managers.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of the next one that's on the radar as far as research trips.
What are you trying to gain from those meetings?
Well, we're working with them to they're working to create like a system for what we call spatial management. So they'll focus on protections for different habitats and locations that are important to fish species that they're managing. So like spawning locations, juvenile locations, those types of things. So yeah, we're going for a meeting to share some data information on that type of stuff.
So
that should be
if all goes well with the meeting, what's the next step after that?
Well, then they put in a marine spatial management plan and that affect development, all those types of things, so that the areas, if they get developed, don't impact the fisheries or impact them less than they would if this stuff wasn't included. So, for example, we identify spawning locations that can't be developed, those types of things. Oh, sorry. So, for example, if we identify a location where fish spawn, then we would work with them to get those locations set aside from development, so they couldn't be developed, like from a resort or something like that.
And more often than not, you get the win on that. They don't ever, like, the resort doesn't pay a massive fee and like end up beating you guys. Like, do you win for the most part, or is it got to take a few losses?
The constant battle. There's a lot of losses. Yeah, like although one victory was Leonardo DiCaprio bought an island, northern Belize, and he wanted to make it into what do you call it, like a eco resort. But as part of that eco resort, he wanted to put these large docks, already extensive docks with bungalows on them, all that kind of stuff. But all of those docks, piers, etc., would have covered all of the flats around that area. And so we worked with the fishing guide community to get that project stopped. Great.
You shut Leonardo down.
So it seems, or at least his partners in the real estate venture. Yeah. So at present, that project is not happening.
I don't know. He seems pretty cool. I feel like if he heard it was going to endanger bonefish, he probably didn't even know about it. It was probably some partners or something. If he heard it was going to endanger bonefish, he'd be like, "No, stop it." So, because he's been involved with Riverkeeper and all types of stuff in New York City.
Yeah, which is fantastic. So yeah, I personally that could really be the case. Don't know. We never ended with.
You never texted me back, so I don't know what happened. But yeah, I don't know, man. It's been a really good interview. Looking at my list of questions, this was solid, bro. Is there anything else you want to speak on and like bring awareness to while you have the floor?
I think we've mostly covered it. I'll just repeat that you can't just go fishing and have fun and go home. You have to be involved in the process to make sure it's around for the next generation, because nobody else is going to give a shit.
Yep.
The people who fish, if you don't protect it, nobody else is going to do it. So yeah, it's a pain in the ass, but get involved in that kind of stuff. Make a difference.
There. Make a difference. We're going to cut it at that, bro.
Yeah. And you got to look at yourself in the mirror every day. Give yourself another positive reason to do it.
If you love the fish, take care of them. It's that
Yeah.
simple.
Very much so.
All right, man. Well, it was great talking to you. I hope you have a good rest of the night.
You too, man. Let me know when you post it.
I definitely will, bro. We'll be in touch.
All right. See ya.
All right. See you, bro.
Don't you walk on me.